Mike was looking for presenters, and I said I really don't have time. I've been really busy, but if you absolutely need me, I can do it. But I have one request, and it's not to follow Bill. And so he complied until we get here, and he didn't comply. So
it's hard to hold Bill down.
yeah. So I've got just a hodgepodge of things I wanted to talk about. Didn't really want to spend a lot of time on any one thing. I got a lot of different things going on with Project Traveler. And so I was just kind of thinking, how do I organize this stuff? And I decided to KISS, but I'm going to keep it stupid simple this time. So this is a variety of hacks and making less work for yourself. So we want to talk a little bit about just some phases of preparedness. There's the flight preparations. I think someone mentioned earlier, didn't follow the checklist and bad things happened. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Launch, Mike pulled a little bit of the wind out of my sail, giving away the 4-shroud line parachute here just a few minutes ago. Going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about chase and recovery, and I'm very envious of the EOS's tracking bricks that they've got going. I've got some things that kind of go along with that, and so we'll kind of get into that. So preparing for the big day. First thing, pre-flight checklists. Take a page out of the pilot manuals and have a checklist. I break my checklist based into three basic sections. You've got the launch preparations. You've got the packing, all the stuff you need to bring with you the night before, the morning of. And then it's kind of a misnomer, but the pre-flight, the stuff that happens on the ground before you launch. And I've got a sample up there on the website, projecttraveler.org. It's under Tools and Miscellaneous Documents. And here's just kind of a screenshot of the one that I use. This is a Word document. You're welcome to download it, to manipulate it. There is no one checklist that's going to work for every flight. They always have to be modified. Not that I necessarily do, because the basic concepts are here, but every system is different. Every flight is different potentially. Shifting gears, Mike mentioned the website. It took care of the GPSL website for this one. I'd already been hosting it from last year, or year before, whenever it was I did it last. But I just want to touch base on a few things here. If you're going to do a website, I know historically the thing was to put together a static HTML website, and those days are gone. If you're still building manual .htm files and uploading to a web server, you're missing out on a lot of efficiencies that can be gained. Content management system is what you're looking for. WordPress and Joomla are probably two of the most popular ones. I'm a Joomla fan, but that's just me. WordPress is more popular. It's a great CMS. Design a template and stick with it, and I'll show you what I've got here in just a second. If anyone's looking at any of my website, any of my launches on the website, they'll look familiar to you. But design a template and delegate your authors if you have a big enough group. EOSS, I think Rick has been the webmeister historically. I don't know if that's still the case. It's been a few years since I've really talked with him, but with the CMS, it's great. You can delegate those authors. You can roll back histories. You can track who's doing what. So somebody's in there messing with things they shouldn't be, you can see that stuff. But ultimately, it creates one source of truth. That's great for communicating with the teams. It's great for communicating with the media and the landowners. I walk up to a farmer's house, and after the dog bites me in the leg, yes, I have a scar down here. After, say, hey, I've got this balloon out there, in this last bullet point here, or the next to last, carry a business card. I hand them a card and say, everything that we're talking about here, it's going to be on the website. There's going to be photos here by tomorrow evening. But it creates that one source of truth. It gives you one spot for all your trackers to know where you're going to meet, what time you're going to meet, and then when they don't show up at the right time, it's their fault, not yours. Support your website through the social media. I know that this group historically has not been a big fan of Facebook, and I know that I communicate with my group pretty much exclusively through Facebook anymore. But the media and the landowners that we're landing on, they're on Facebook. And so don't neglect that just because you have a personal bias or the group has a bias. Don't neglect that because it's a great publicity spot. This is just a screenshot of my kind of template that I use, not the whole website template, but the template that I use for the launch. But every launch is the same. It starts up there at the top, what time the launch is, where it's going to be, including lat lawns. It's helpful for anybody that's running predicts. Capsules are broken down with links to track those capsules. What kind of rigging you have. This was kind of a bad example because I should have weights on each one of these. This was one that I was kind of flying secondary on, so I didn't have all the data for this particular flight. But all the weights should add up. You have a total neck weight, what kind of balloon you have, and then you should be able to back into that with your burst altitude and ascent rates and all that. So that's a template that I use. All right, so once you have all this data collected, it becomes this one source of truth. There comes a time that you need to do an integration testing, and ultimately you need to do a feature freeze. One of the things that we've run into, I've seen it, especially as I work with the schools, they like to keep going and going and going, and Friday night they're saying, well, we have this package, and I'll bring it by your house on Friday night, and we're going to fly it in the morning. And no, that's not going to work with me. I've been bitten too much by RFI and EMI problems. So, there's different things to mitigate some of those risks, but you need to test these things ahead of time. GPS signal loss issues, you may have caught posts that I put out kind of a couple months ago. Bill's helped me out with some of the GPS issues. Video cameras, in this case, turned out to be a visual sensor, not a camera, but a light sensor from SparkFun is causing lots of interference coming back down the power line. But those things, you need time to work on those. And at some point, and I pick 1 week out, if I don't have it figured out a week out, it's not flying. We're done. We're going to yank it. We're going to reconfigure whatever we have to do. But 1 week out, we're going to freeze that. And that prevents some of the scope and feature creep and allows you that time to test. It also creates that deadline that I need this by this date. If it's not here, we're not going to fly it. And that seems to be pretty effective with people that are kind of, I'll bring it by on Thursday or Friday whenever I get it wrapped up. Oh, don't worry, it'll be there Saturday morning. So that is one of the things on my checklist. That's a snippet from that checklist that we saw a little bit ago. But that's one of the things to check off 1 week prior. That's going to happen. Until that's checked off, we're not going to move on with the rest of the stuff. Filing a NOTAM. Who here has filed a NOTAM? A lot of you? Okay. So from the new groups, I get a lot of questions. I put together an FAQ. So there's a template out on my website. They're real simple. This is the one I cobbled together for tomorrow. I have not filed this, so I'm not taking. You're filed. Mike's filed. But if I was filing, this is exactly what I would write. High altitude balloon 3 east of the Kilo Papa Echo Alpha Airport, east northeast bound, reaching flight level 600 June 15, from 13 to 15. Any questions about filing a NOTAM, Harry?
If you've never filed one and you're doing it for the first time, don't be surprised that they have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You may have to tell them what information they need.
Yeah.
They've turned a lot of it over to civilian corporations and personnel, and they really can't do it.
Yes, they're using a template now also, so it's helped me also.
Some of them don't even know where the template is.
Some will use a template, and they'll go through and they'll say,
Yeah.
the next thing I need from you. So some of them, they don't know, but they do, at least they can find the template.
Well,
I got today's example, I filed at about 10:30 this morning, and I filed that language, which I've used for, 6 years, maybe 5 years. And today, instead of three east of Pella, they wanted the new DOR.
Yeah, the last time I filed, they didn't want the airport, they wanted one of those,
Yeah.
So, I do all that because I'm just kind of anal about that, but, so I had it, but.
Yeah.
Another good thing is to get the initials of whoever took it.
Yeah.
Keep the information, the number of the NOTAM that they
Yeah.
file, so for the next time
I'm going to keep going. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this, but yes, there are templates. About 2 years ago, I was getting real good luck with the templates. The last year or so, they don't seem to have this template anymore. And I think maybe some ownership has changed. They're not identifying themselves as the Lockheed Martin reporting line anymore. I think it maybe has gone back to the FAA or something. I'm not quite sure. It's the same phone number, but they're answering the phone a little bit different. But anyway, glad everyone's following NOTAM. It's a great CYA. It does not fix anything as a pilot. Having a NOTAM out there really doesn't change my behavior as a pilot, but it is a great CYA, and it's something that we can do and that we need to do, even though we are technically exempt.
I'm going to throw one more thing in. Of course, EOSS is all over this, but I'm not cutting the sticks. But I always call Des Moines Tower, and I call Chicago Center. We're under Chicago Center airspace here. I always call them on launch and landing, and they're very appreciative.
Yeah.
There's not much they do about it, but they're very appreciative.
1-800-WX brief.
Yeah, it's in those instructions. Harry's saying 1-800-WX brief. Yes, my local tower, it's a tower at airport, and they appreciate being notified on launch. They really don't care about the recovery, but they're interested, I think. I don't think it's so much need to know. Although I do coordinate them with inside the class Delta. I do coordinate them. If they have any traffic inbound, I'll hold off to release until they give me the okay. But usually it's, I'm going to launch in 3, and they say fine. So maintaining your sanity, this first section, user checklist, document everything, including there's a spot on there for the NOTAM, what I filed, and the NOTAM reference number, whatever it is they give you back. And then feature freeze this thing 1 week out. So tips for the launch site. Stay organized. This is a photo of all the stuff that I have in my launch tub. I have a dedicated box in there, and despite the temptations that I have when I'm in the basement and I have a leaky pipe, I don't go to the launch tub and grab my channel locks and go tighten the pipe, because I know me, it will not make it back to the launch tub. So I don't touch this. It stays in the basement, stays ready to go. But pretty much all the standard stuff. Want to be mindful of the fire extinguisher. A lot of you guys are flying hydrogen now, have a fire extinguisher handy. I love the EOSS group. I think they're still flying some, like a water sprayer or something to put out any kind of grass fires, just small little stuff that might occur, but have that. And then be mindful of other things. I mean, we know we don't want sharp objects around that balloon, so don't include sharp objects. Think about what tools go into that tool bag, and that's what the black bag is up top. That's the wrenches and things that I need there at the bottom of the balloon. I don't want to put a utility knife in there or some sort of large blade, some razor. There's no reason to have that at that point in the flight. Avionics. We've heard a little bit about avionics today, and this is my last version. It's been superseded now, but let this thing. I just want to touch on a couple things. Let this thing help you out. A lot of them have some sort of a piezo beeper on it. Let it talk to you. And a lot of you guys write your own code for these things. So let it talk to you. Let it tell you, hey, there's a GPS lock failure. There's Morse code, works great. You don't have to, it doesn't take that long to memorize a couple, 3-4 letters of Morse code, and it can really tell you what's going on. Also talking about avionics here, be very considerate of turbulence and landing. One of my next flights, probably next year sometime, I want to send up an IMU unit and actually measure what kind of turbulence we experience on the flights. But based on what I've seen from some of the camera footage and the way things get shifted around, I think that these flights are a lot more turbulent than a lot of us really give them credit for. So I'm anxious to kind of to document that, but protect that wiring, and then use damage-resistant antennas. I know there's been a lot of talk about the steel piano wires. What I personally use is like 16, probably 14 or 16 gauge Romex wire. I split apart. I roll the ends over so it doesn't stab you in the eye. But I have that thing, and it's glued, or it's soldered onto a circuit board, and then it goes up and down so you can bend the thing out straight, and when it lands it just crumples up and doesn't do any damage. So be mindful of those things. Speaking of Ralph Wallio earlier, Ralph helped me recover this thing, this disaster. This was my first flight back around 2001. Underfilled the balloon, went up. It was almost a really bad day. It turned out to be fine, but this is my first flight. I did lots and lots of bad things. Number one, it was huge. I had all these debug ports on here, all this stuff, long cabling, batteries that somehow managed to stay in their socket. How, I don't know, but that is bad. Don't do that. Don't be Zack. You can see I've got soldered ribbon cable here that is not protected. Those ribbon, any kind of a stranded wire especially, you solder it, that solder wicks up into that braid, and then as vibration happens, it'll eventually cut itself off. And so that's really bad. This thing flew once. It was successful. It was what I considered Beta 1. It was my 2001 very first flight. Made it back. I completely scrapped all this and replaced it with something a little more reliable. But don't do this. This is kind of where I'm headed with a lot of my flights. So this is an Arduino Shield, is why the form factor is what it is. But simple configuration. There's just a Windows utility to configure all that, because I don't want to touch the firmware right before a flight. I've got flight freezes. If I'm going to touch firmware, it needs to go through flight testing, and I usually run at least one actual flight on a test firmware before I release it to the hounds. So this kind of helps keep me out of that and gives me the way to configure things, whether it's time slots or want to turn this sensor on or that off. Piezo, like I mentioned, let it talk to you. Integrated stuff. There's no reason to have wires connecting these things together. There's plenty of integrated boards out there on the market today, so you don't have to have big wires that act as antennas and start picking up RF and cause feedback. And then the wires that you do have, make sure they're a good friction fit, or preferably some sort of a screw or a positive lock. I use a 2.1 millimeter, whatever it is, barrel connector for my power, and then an SMA for the antenna. Again, structural integrity. Everything should be plug and play. Fortunately, nobody in this room, but I've watched some things that just made me go, people out there on the launch morning just emptying a tub of parts and saying, okay, what are we going to launch today? And I got some wire nuts, we'll tie this together. And I just, no, you're asking for problems. You're not doing engineering on the launch day. There's too many other things going on. Ideal connectors should have some sort of positive relief. If it's friction, make sure it's routed so that as things shift during flight, that they're not going to come loose. Pack them so they can't move around, and don't solder the wires directly to the circuit board if you have to for some reason. Make sure you have a strain relief so that there's no vibration or no tension on that wire. Don't get tangled. I heard EOS's name get thrown under the bus a little bit ago. I've seen more people than I care to admit. They like to have very complex parachutes. I've flown the Rocket Man parachutes, I believe, since the first flight. I think that's what I've exclusively flown. They're great. They have a line. They're originally for rockets, model rockets, but they have a line of high-altitude balloon. They're 4 shroud lines, and then on their high-altitude balloon line, they have an integrated attach point right on the top for the balloon. Load lines, we're going to see a video here in just a minute, but I just want to kind of preface this by saying you need some separation. Going back to the whole RFI problems, separating, my rule of thumb is 1 wavelength, so roughly 6 feet, which I don't measure that. It doesn't matter. I stretch out about 10 feet of line, cut off a little extra, tie in a big knot, so it winds up around 7, 8 feet, somewhere in that neighborhood. I'm not a big believer in long load lines, which we're going to see here in just a second. And I'm also kind of curious to see, maybe at dinner tonight we can discuss where we attach the balloon. But I want to show you what I've been playing with. I didn't really care for this. Fortunately, it wasn't in the shroud lines.
Just a long line?
Yes. So that was, 6-8 feet. Spent a lot of time cutting that thing out. So then on that drone footage, this is very short. There's about a 1 foot above the parachute. Notice that parachute came down nice and easy. Now we did get lucky on that one. We didn't bring back a lot of balloon on that last flight, but even so, I mean, we had plenty of clearance. At worst, it might have wrapped around one of those shroud lines, but didn't have near the problems that we had. We've flown that 2 or 3 times now with very short, and so far I'm happy with it. Every time I run the camera, which that's the camera I was shooting that with, every time I run the camera on it, see basically the same thing. It stays up there. I really thought, man, that's going to lay on the top of that parachute and deform it, cause lots of problems. It doesn't. It just barely just kind of flops along right along the edge. And those are the Rocket Man chutes. You can see there's just 4 nice little shroud lines. They stay put. Really great parachutes. Highly recommended them if you guys are in the market for a parachute. So going on, like I said, this is just a hodgepodge of things. Video cameras, I know I've flown a lot of the CHDK stuff in the past. I've flown camcorders. I was thinking back last night as I was kind of preparing for this thing. My first camera was the old APS or APC film stuff, and I had the servo to go out there and big balsa contraption that held everything in place, and thought, man, this is great. If you haven't started playing with these dash cams, they're great. This Aki that I found on Amazon for about $60, they're very reliable, very good quality. I run one in the Jeep full time, and then I've been flying my second one. I use a USB battery pack to power them, so there's no extra cabling. You just plug in a USB cable and you go. And I haven't totally run a battery pack dead, but I've tested it on, in the house for like 7 hours, and it just keeps going. These dash cams have simple file management, so they'll overwrite themselves over time, and that seems really great. And on my checklist, I have this thing that says format the SD cards, because GoPros are notorious for not liking cards that have been monkeyed with. They like to be formatted. And I thought, oh, these things take care of auto overwriting these things. Well, I got the flight back, and I had like 5 minutes of video from the flight. I thought, what's going on? This thing, it was set to auto overwrite. Well, I had pulled it out of a different dash cam, and so it had written all the files and filled up that disk in one spot, and then this one went to the other spot and started writing it. Oh, I'm full. I'm going to go delete it. Oh, I'm full. I'm going to go delete it. So follow your checklist and always format your cards like you say you're going to. There are reasons why you put those things in your checklist. That was an oops moment that I had, but I learned my lesson. Yeah, put the SD card back in. Yes. Oh, and then the other thing that I really like about these Aki, and I'm sure others do it too, but they are set up so that if it detects a car crash, if it has a high G moment, it saves that off to a separate spot. Well, the burst and the landing are 2 high G points, and so it will automatically take my burst and my landing videos and dump them off into a separate protected directory. So even if for some reason didn't find it for a couple days, it would still have those off in a protected area. So anyway, really like these Akis. I think I'm going to swap out all my video cameras with these things.
So they don't have an internal
They do not have an internal battery. The ad says that it has a supercapacitor or something like that, which implies that it's going to run for some period of time. It runs for about 300 milliseconds after you unplug it. And really what it's for is just to finish writing that last file to disk. I think I've got 64s in mine. I think you can go up to 128s.
And how long do you get on 64?
Way more than a flight. I usually fly at the 720p. You can set the different settings. It'll do the 1080p, but I get tired of it filling up my hard drive, so I set it down to 720.
And what's the current range?
I don't know. I've got the USB stick that's about the size of your thumb, a little bit longer, and like I said, I've got like 7 hours off of that thing, so it's very minimal. I've never actually split open a wire to measure the current because I don't care. It's all taken care of. So smooth launches. Keep things as simple as possible. Pre-configure everything. Have it all ready to go. You plug it in, you go, and then keep your tools organized. Don't steal from yourself. Getting your stuff back. Last section. So safety is priority number one. The chase is the most dangerous part of the hobby. I think we've been fairly lucky that at least no one's admitted to having any wrecks or getting damaged, getting hurt. But it is the most dangerous part. So always have a co-pilot and keep your head up. I don't recommend having multiple heads. So the heads-up transceiver, if you have older radios in your vehicle, whatever the situation may be, like the FTM 400, which is what that is, works great. I stick mine up on the dash. Before anyone asks, no, it doesn't get cooked in the summer. I'm in Kansas. A few of you guys have been to Kansas before, and you know how hot it gets there. This thing sits out on a parking lot all summer long while I'm at work, and that's the same head that's been in there for years and years. Don't have any heat issues. But they'll show you, without any PCs, they'll show you the relative position of yourself to the balloon because it has a GPS in itself.
What's that, Zack?
That's the FTM 400. That's a Yaesu. Kenwood has a good one. I couldn't tell you the part number, but 700 or something. 710. Yeah. I'm sure the Kenwoods are great. I kind of got into the Yaesu, so that's what I've got is a couple of these 700s. So yeah, keep your eyes out, and then also. For in-dash entertainment, I swapped out the stock radio in the Jeep and put in this 2-DIN, basically Android tablet, and so it serves as the radio, but it's also an Android tablet. So here's a photo of chasing a balloon. This is just apers.fi. I might, if I get ambitious tonight, I might go ahead and load Apers Droid on this and see how that compares. I tie it in with my iPad, so I get cell service on the road, and then you get a second screen, and you actually get the internet watching it, so you get a little bit different perspective than just RF perspective. And then I have not had any of my vehicles, but I think some of them will mirror, even an iOS device, mirror your phone screen. So that would be another thing, just to keep your head up and give you some situational awareness. Balloon Finder. So I've got, I mentioned this a couple years ago, and it continues to kind of mature, and I haven't done a lot of development on it the last few years, but it's what I use exclusively. Pretty much everyone in my group is using this now. It's purpose-built to tracking software. It's very similar in nature to what we saw this morning from the OSS group. It uses the OpenStreetMap that are all locally cached. It ties into the position from the GPS, so in addition to what like an apers.fi is going to show you, where it just shows you the balloon, this is going to show you where you're at in relation. And then it pulls that information from either the TNC and or the apers.is systems. But then it will calculate the relative bearing to the balloon, and then it'll do real-time predictions. So just a couple screenshots of this thing. This was a flight we did a few months ago. Landed over in a really bad spot. We had a turnpike, so a toll road coming up through here, which is really hard to cross, as you can imagine. We had a lake, we had a city, and it was just bad. Plus, we had a bus full of kids that were trying to chase this thing, and it didn't work out the greatest. It was here, predicted to land here. We thought it was going to land here because I tried to outsmart it. It landed here. So, yeah, my bad. But anyway, so the blue is the ascent, and then it burst right up here, and then the red is descent, and the predicted landing. It's doing real-time predictions, so load the winds aloft forecasts in before we launch, and then it starts replacing those forecasts with actual encountered winds aloft as it collects the data from the balloon. It does the local map cache, so you don't have to have internet service while you're out on the road. It also does audio and audio feedback and voice enunciation. So, you know, like I said earlier, let it talk to you. So this thing, it has and I know this isn't technically incorrect, but it has a sonar ping that goes off every time a packet's received within reason. It won't do it more than like every 30 seconds, but it'll ping in the car. And so while I'm driving, you know, just every minute or so, I'm hearing the sonar chime in my ear, and I know that things are still being received and things are going well. If it suddenly goes quiet, then it causes me to start thinking, okay, if I stopped receiving for some reason. So I do that, and then have my youngest daughter back here. When she was probably about 6, she recorded a bunch of voice enunciation. And so if you download the Balloon Finder and you start chasing a balloon, you'll hear her come across in a very sweet, innocent voice and announce how high the balloon is, and I forget what all it comes across, the bearing to the balloon or something. So use your senses to pull in information. So tracking system, I really liked what EOSS did. They were kind of on the same thought process that I had. You know, historically, you have these wires that plug into the laptop, and they get to be kind of a pain after a while. And so I thought, you know what? I don't really want these wires. They get tangled up. They get pulled loose. They come disconnected. You got to worry about the whole USB to serial adapters tying to a lot of TNCs. Just didn't like it. So introduced Bluetooth. So I had, instead of the wired GPS pucks like what you guys have been running, just do a Bluetooth, set it up on the dash, and it Bluetooths back in. And the TNC, you run a TNC X, I think it is, with the Bluetooth module. It Bluetooths in, and then you have no wires. If you have, assuming you have battery on your laptop, you can just be completely wireless. Throw it up on the dash, take it outside, set it on the hood, and sit around and look at it. It works great. I've had 0 complaints about that. This is the case that I've got. It's a gun case, but you can see the TNCX down there at the bottom. And this is an old Alinco handheld radio. I've got the power pole, Anderson power poles that tie into the vehicle wiring. And then I've got an AB switch up here, which I'll explain here in just a minute. So at lunch today, Bill was talking about how he did an experiment. I think I'm going to repeat this correctly. He had a vertically polarized antenna on a balloon. He had good signal, 20 over 9 or something like that. 20 over 9, 20 over 9. He drives under it. It goes down to nothing, basically. And then he drives out the other side, and he has 20 over 9. Well, I got kind of tired of that. The closer you get to the balloon, the worse your signal is, which is kind of counterintuitive. And so I found 2 problems. One was occasionally, not always, but occasionally I was flying a rubber ducky antenna on the payload. And I learned kind of the hard way that a rubber ducky antenna does not work the same way in free space as it does on the ground. When you're holding a handheld in your hand, your body is becoming the counterpoise for that antenna. When it's in free space, there is no counterpoise, and so you lose a ton of efficiency. So if you're going to do the rubber ducky, put a pigtail on it. They used to call them tiger whips or something. It was a 19-inch piece of wire. You tie it to the shield of your coax. Tiger tail, yeah. I don't know if those things are still around. I haven't noticed them lately, but they serve a very specific purpose, and you need them in space. But that wasn't the whole deal. So I started thinking about, you know, what can I do to kind of fix some of this? So I thought, well, maybe I need another antenna. And so I started looking. This is the radiation pattern, basically, of the antenna that's on your roof, just a vertical polarized, you know, quarter wave, 5/8 wave, whatever the case may be. And you can see that you've got this great big knoll right here where your balloon is supposed to be, and that's kind of problematic. When it's on the ground over here, great, you have some gain maybe. But when it's up above you, you have a really bad problem. And so you couple that with a vertical antenna that's sitting on the balloon doing the exact same thing, and you can see there's a bit of a problem. You have 20, 30, 40 dB of null, coupling with 20, 30, 40 dB of null, and it's not going to work. So I got thinking, okay, what can we do? I started thinking about the HF guys. They're always complaining about warming the clouds up above them because they couldn't get their dipole antenna up high enough. And so I thought, well, you know, what can we do here? And so I pulled off some diagrams, and it's kind of hard to see, but this is a tenth of a wavelength above ground, 0.15, 0.2. So, you know, relatively short distances in 2 meter terms, and you obviously don't want it, you know, I think this is 1.5 wavelength. You don't want that. You want these, what HF guys would consider inefficient. And so I put a horizontally polarized antenna up on the top of the roof. And I realize you do take a little bit of a hit for the cross polarization, but I'd rather take a little bit of a hit here and avoid this notch and actually get a slight amount of gain rather than having two nulls sitting on top of each other. I've flown this, I think this will be the third flight, and so far it's going quite well. I put just a, I'm not sure if it's fiberglass or graphite. It does not have any conductivity, but it's some sort of a plastic pole I found at Lowe's. Epoxied it into an old mag mount, came up here, fiberglassed in a T, and just have a dipole. I was looking back at these diagrams. I was thinking, you know, man, which one do I use? You know, it looks like we kind of maximize right here, but you know, 0.1, that's you know, very low profile and everything. And so I wound up going and measuring the garage door, and I found that fits in my garage. Preliminary tests is, you know, I have the FTM400 sitting up there in the dash, and I've got the laptop sitting there with Balloon Finder running, chiming at me, and it seems like I'm getting about twice as many packets coming off the laptop running on this antenna than I am on the FTM400. So I don't have an antenna range that will give me the area that I need vertically to be able to do something like this to test a whole lot, but that's what I've been working on. We're also kind of talking about at lunch, you know, there is still the problem that you still have this null up here. One of the things that I do, because I've got those antennas that just kind of bend, is I've been kind of playing with kind of making them sideways, so not quite vertical. It sounds like Bill has kind of been doing the same thing. He's been bending the tips of the antenna to get kind of a horizontal component to that to help get rid of some of that null and at least make it dirty, if not go completely away. Last thing I want to touch on here real quick, we've been playing with drones. I've got a guy in the club that he's got a drone, and I didn't get a chance to ask him what type of drone it was. I know that whenever there's the least bit of rain or wind, he won't get it out, so I think it's expensive. But we've been using it to spot the packages and do some aerial photography, as you saw in the video a little bit ago. This is kind of good. We haven't had the situation arise yet, but I hate walking up to a house and saying, yeah, I really think there's a balloon out here about 1/4 mile, but no, I don't know if it's on the other side of the row or not. With this, we can actually take off, go out, look, figure out where it is, and then I can go up to the landowner and say, you know what, I've got a balloon, it's just on this side over by the pond. And then, you know, it gives me some assurance, yes, I'm talking to the right landowner, first of all, but, you know, if there's something out there, if there's a fence, if there's cattle, something like that, you know, we know what we're talking about. And Paul, I know you've talked about putting a digipeater up. Did you ever?
I've done one and got so the balloon's on the capsule's on the ground, and you don't get good line of sight to that. I put a drone up with a RGB systems.
Mm-hmm.
Digipeater, I can get a signal if there's a mile away on the ground, and I was just going to put it on the signal.
So yeah, Paul's been working, just to repeat, putting a digipeater up so that when the balloon's on the ground and it's not on the APRS IS coverage, you can get out there, digipede it to your crew, or potentially digipede it off to get to an IS gateway. We haven't gone there yet. We've kind of been kicking it around, but that's one of the next things that we want to work on. So stay safe, keep your head up, utilize all your senses, use the sound, use that to your advantage. And then have the right technologies. I think I am over time. Any other questions?
Zack,
Bill.
I wanted to chime in about the importance of checklists.
toggle switch goes on in a certain order for flight. So I rig up the balloon, get it all ready, say, are you ready? They said, yes. Off it goes. 1,000 feet in the air, and I hear one of the students say to the other, did you turn it on? I said, no, I thought you did. The professor had them write a full report on the importance of checklists.
I haven't made anyone write a report yet, but that's a great idea. So, nothing else, I think. Turn it over to Mike